Hello, everybody. So, yesterday we had a slight technical problem where my hard drive ran out of space. So, instead of saving the video that I had recorded that took an hour, it very helpfully deleted the video, which is why you didn't get a bedtime story last night. But I went ahead and moved a couple of the old stories onto the portable hard drive, so hopefully that fixes that. Um, Oh, right. And the other thing, I don't get paid for this. I just do it because I wanna. So if you guys get ads or anything, just skip them. I don't mind. So we are in House of Many Ways, Chapter 3, Take 2, in which Charmaine works several spells at once. The bathroom was as reassuring as Great Uncle William's kindly voice. It had a worn greenstone floor and a little window at which fluttered a green net curtain, and it had all of the fitments Charmaine knew from home, and home was nothing but the best, she thought. Better still, it had taps and the toilet flushed. True, the bath and the taps were strange, slightly bulbous shapes, as if the person who installed them had not been quite sure what he or she was aiming at, but the taps, when Charmaine experimentally turned them on, ran cold and hot water just as they were supposed to, and there were warm towels on a rail under the mirror. Perhaps I can put one of those laundry bags in the bath, Charmaine mused. But how would I squeeze it dry? Across the corridor from the bathroom was a row of doors stretching away into dim distance. Charmaine went to the nearest one and pushed it open, expecting it to lead to the living room. But there was a small bedroom beyond it instead. Obviously Great Uncle William's, to judge by the mess. The white covers trailed off the unmade bed, almost on top of several stripy nightshirts scattered over the floor. Shirts dangled out of drawers, along with socks and what looked like long underclothes, and the open cupboard held a musty smelling uniform of some kind. Under the window were two more stacks stuffed full of laundry. Charmaine groaned aloud. Suppose he's been ill for quite some time, she said, trying to be charitable. But mother of pearl, why do I have to deal with it all? The bed started twitching. Charmaine jumped round to face it. The twitching was Waif, curled up comfortably in the mound of bedclothes, scratching for a flea. When he saw Charmaine looking at him, he wagged his flimsy tail and grovelled, lowered his fraying ears, and whispered a pleading whine at her. You're not supposed to be in there, are you? She said to him. All right, I can see you're comfortable, and I'm blowed if I'm sleeping in that bed anyway. She marched out of the room and opened the next door along. To her relief, there was another bedroom there, almost identical, with Great Uncle William's, except that this one was tidy. The bed was clean and neatly made, the cupboard was shut, and when she looked, she found that the drawers were empty. Charmaine nodded approval at the room and opened the next door along the corridor. There was another neat bedroom there, and beyond that another, each one exactly the same. Well, I'd better throw my things around one that's mine, or I'll never find it again, she thought. She turned back into the corridor to find that Waif had come off the bed and was now scratching at the bathroom door with both front paws. You don't want to go in there, Charmaine told him. None of it's of any use to you. But the door came open somehow before Charmaine got to it. Beyond it was the kitchen. Waif trotted jauntily in there, and Charmaine groaned again. The mess had not, in fact, gone away. There were the dirty crockery and the laundry bags, with the addition now of a teapot laying in a pool of tea, Charmaine's clothes in a heap near the table, and a large green bar of soap in the fireplace. I'd forgotten all about this, Charmaine said. Waif put both tiny front paws on the bottom rung of the chair and raised himself to his full, small length, pleadingly. You're hungry again, Charmaine diagnosed. So am I. She sat in the chair, and Waif sat on her left foot, and they shared another pasty. Then they shared a fruit tart, 2 donuts, 6 chocolate biscuits, and a custard flan. After this, Waif plodded rather heavily away to the inner door, which opened for him as soon as he scratched it. Charmaine gathered up her pile of clothes and followed him, meaning to put her things in the first empty bedroom. But here things went a trifle wrong. Charmaine pushed the door open with one elbow and fairly naturally turned right to go into the corridor with the bedrooms in it. She found herself in complete darkness. Almost at once she walked into another door, where she hit her elbow on its doorknob with a clang. "Oh," she said, and fumbled for the doorknob and opened this door. It swung inward majestically. Charmaine walked into a large room lit by arched windows all around it, and found herself breathing a damp, stuffy, leathery, neglected smell. The smell seemed to come from the elderly leather seats of carved chairs arranged around the big table that took up most of the room. Each seat had a leather mat on the table in front of it, and an old, withered sheet of blotting paper on the mat, except for the large seat at the other end that had the arms of High Norland carved into the back of it. Which is to say, the coat of arms, not somebody's floppy fingers. This one had a fat little stick on the table instead of a mat. All of it, chairs, table, and mats, were covered in dust, and there were cobwebs in the corners of the many windows. Charmaine stared. "Is this the dining room, or what?" she said. "How do I get to the bedrooms from here?" Great Uncle William's voice spoke, sounding quite faint and far off. "You have reached the conference room," it said. "If you are there, you are rather lost, my dear, so listen carefully. Turn round once, clockwise. Then, still turning clockwise, open the door with your left hand only. Go through and let the door shut behind you. Then, take 2 long steps sideways to your left. This will bring you back beside the bathroom." Let's hope it does, Charmaine thought, doing her best to follow these directions. All went well, except for the moment of darkness, after the door had swung shut behind her. Then Charmaine found herself staring into a totally strange stone corridor. An old, bent man was pushing a trolley along it, loaded with a steaming silver teapot, jugs and chafing dishes, and what looked like a pile of crumpets. She blinked a little, decided that she would not do any good, either to herself nor to the old man, by calling out to him, and took 2 long steps to the left instead. And then, to her relief, she was standing beside the bathroom, from whence she could see Waif turning round and round on Great Uncle William's bed in order to get more comfortable. "Whew," Charmaine said, and she went and dumped the pile of clothes on top of the chest of drawers in the next bedroom along. After that, she went along the corridor to the open window at the end, where she spent some minutes staring out at that sloping sunlit meadow and breathing the fresh, chilly air that blew in from it. A person could easily climb out of this, she thought, or in. But she was not really seeing the meadow, nor thinking of the fresh air. Her real thoughts were with that enticing book of spells that she had left open on Great Uncle William's desk. She'd never in her life been let loose among magic like this. It was hard to resist. "I shall just open it at random and do the first spell I see," she thought. "Just one spell." In the study, the Book of Palimpsest was, for some reason, now open at "A spell to find yourself a handsome prince." "Who needs a prince?" she said. She opened the book again, carefully at a different place. This page was headed, "A spell for flying." "Oh, yes," Charmaine said. "That's much more like it." She put her glasses on and studied the list of ingredients. A sheet of paper, a quill pen. Easy, there's both of these on the desk. 1 egg. Kitchen. 2 flower petals, 1 pink and 1 blue. 6 drops of water. Bathroom. 1 red hair, 1 white hair, and 2 pearl buttons. "No problem at all," Charmaine said. She took her glasses off and bustled about assembling ingredients. She hurried to the kitchen. She got to that by opening the bathroom door and turning left, and was almost too excited to find that she had got this right, and asked the air, "Where do I find the eggs?" Great Uncle William's gentle voice replied, "Eggs are in a crock in the pantry, my dear. I think it's behind the laundry bags. I do apologize for leaving you with such disorder." Charmaine went into the pantry and leaned across the laundry bags, where, sure enough, she found an old pie dish with half a dozen brown eggs in it. She took one of them carefully back to the study. Since her glasses were dangling on the chain, she failed to notice that the Book of Palimpsest was now open to "A spell to find hidden treasure." She bustled over to the study window, where the flower petals were ready to hand on a hydrangea bush that was one half pink and the other blue. She laid those beside the egg and rushed to the bathroom, where she collected 6 drops of water in a tooth mug. On the way back, she went across the passage to where Waif was now curled up like a meringue on Great Uncle William's blankets. "Excuse me," Charmaine said to him, and raked her fingers along his ragged white back. She came away with quite a number of white hairs, one of which she put beside the flower petals, and added to that a red hair from her own head. As for the pearl buttons, she simply ripped 2 of them off the front of her blouse. "Right," she said, and put her glasses eagerly on again to look at the instructions. The book of palimpsest was now open at "A spell for personal protection." But Charmaine was too excited to notice. She looked only at the instructions, which were in 5 stages. Stage 1 said, "Place all ingredients except quill and paper in a suitable bowl." Charmaine, after taking her glasses off to stare searchingly around the room, and finding no bowl, suitable or not, was forced to go off into the kitchen again. While she was gone, lazily and slyly, the book of palimpsest turned over another couple of pages, and when Charmaine came back with a slightly sugary bowl, having tipped all of the sugar out at a not-too-dirty plate, the book was open to "A spell to increase magical power." Charmaine did not notice. She put the bowl down on the desk and piled into it the egg, the 2 petals, the 2 hairs, her 2 buttons, and dripped the water carefully on top. Then she put her glasses on and leaned over the book to discover what she did next. By this time, the book of palimpsest was displaying "A spell to become invisible," but Charmaine only looked at the instructions and did not see this. Stage 2 told her to mash all ingredients together using only the pen. It was not easy to mash up an egg with a feather, but Charmaine managed it, stabbing with the sharpened end over and over until the shell fell to pieces. Then, stirring so hard that her hair fell down over her face in red strands, and finally, when nothing seemed to mix properly, whisking with the feather end. When she finally stood up, panting, and pushed her hair away with sticky fingers, the book had turned to yet another page. It now displayed "A spell to start a fire." But Charmaine was too busy trying not to get egg on her glasses to see. She put them on and studied stage 3. Stage 3 of the spell said, "Recite 3 times Hegemony Gauda." "Hegemony Gauda," Charmaine intoned obediently over the bowl. She was not sure, but on the 3rd repetition, she thought the bits of eggshell seethed around the pearl buttons a little. "I think it's working," she thought. She pushed her glasses back on her nose and looked at stage 4. By this time, she was looking at the stage 4 in "A spell to bend objects to the will." "Take up the quill," this said, "and, using the prepared mixture, write upon the paper the word ILF, surrounded by a 5-sided figure. Care must be taken not to touch the paper while doing this." Charmaine took up the drippy, sticky feather pen, adorned with bits of eggshell and a piece of pink petal, and did her best. The mixture was not easy to write with, and there seemed to be no way to hold the paper steady. It slipped and it slid, while Charmaine dipped and scratched, and the word that was supposed to be ILF came out gluey and semi-visible and crooked and looked more like hoof, because the red hair in the bowl came out on the pen halfway through and did strange loopy things across the word. As for the 5-sided figure, the paper slipped sideways while Charmaine was trying to draw it, and the most that could be said for it was that it had 5 sides. It finished as a sinister egg yolk yellow shape with a dog hair sticking off one corner. Charmaine heaved up a breath, plastered her hair back with a now extremely sticky hand, and looked at the final stage, stage 5. It was now stage 5 of "A spell to make a wish come true," but she was far too flustered to notice. It said, placing the feather back into the bowl, clap hands 3 times and say, "Tax." "Tax, tax, tax," Charmaine said, clapping hard and stickily. Something evidently worked. The paper, the bowl, and the quill pen all vanished quietly and completely. So did most of the sticky trickles on Great Uncle William's desk. The book of palimpsest shut itself with a snap. Charmaine stood back, dusting crumbly bits from her hands, feeling quite exhausted and rather let down. "But I should be able to fly," she told herself. "Wonder where the best place to test it out is." The answer was obvious. Charmaine went out of the study and along to the end of the passage, to where the window stood invitingly open to the sloping green below. The window had a broad, low sill perfect for climbing over, In a matter of seconds, Charmaine was out in the meadow in the evening sunlight, breathing the cold, clean air of the mountains. She was right up in the mountains here, with most of High Norland spread out beneath her, already blue with evening. Opposite her, lit up orange by the low sun and deceivingly near, were the snowy peaks that separated her country from Strangia, Montalbino, and other foreign places. Behind her were more peaks, where large gray and crimson clouds were crowding up ominously. It was going to rain up here soon, as it often did in High Norland, but, for the moment, it was warm and peaceful. There were sheep grazing in another meadow just beyond some rocks, and Charmaine could hear mooing and bells tonkling from a herd of cows somewhere quite near. When she looked that way, she was a trifle startled to find that the cows were in a meadow above her, and that there was no sign of Great Uncle William's house, nor the window that she had climbed out of. Charmaine did not let this worry her. She'd never been this high in the mountains before, and she was astonished at how beautiful it was. The grass she was standing on was greener than any she had seen in the town. Fresh scents blew off of it. These came when she looked closely from hundreds and hundreds of tiny, exquisite flowers growing low in the grass. "Oh, Great Uncle William, you are lucky," she cried out. "Fancy having this next door to your study." For a while she wandered blissfully about, avoiding the bees that were busy among the flowers, and picking herself a bunch that was supposed to be one of each kind. She picked a tiny scarlet tulip, a white one, a starry golden flower, a pale pygmy primrose, a mauve harebell, a blue cup, an orange orchid, and one each from crowded clumps of pink and white and yellow. But the flowers that took her fancy most were tiny blue trumpets, more piercingly blue than any blue she could have imagined. Charmaine thought they might be gentians, and she picked more than one. They were so small, so perfect, and so blue. All the time she was wandering farther down the meadow, to where there seemed to be a drop-off of some kind. She thought she might jump off of here and see if the spell had made her really able to fly. She reached the drop-off at this time when she found she had more flowers than she could hold. There were 6 new kinds at the rocky edge that she had to leave where they were, but then she forgot the flowers and just stared. The meadow ended in a cliff half the mountain high. Way, way below her, beside the little thread of the road, she could see Great Uncle William's house, like a tiny gray box in a smudge of garden. She could see other houses equally far off, scattered up and down the road, and lights coming on in them in tiny orange twinkles. They were so far below that Charmaine gulped and her knees shook slightly. "I think I'll give flying practice up for the moment," she said. "But how do I get down?" asked a subdued inner thought. "Well, don't let's think about that now," another inner thought replied firmly. "Let's just enjoy the view." She could almost see most of High Norland from up here, after all. Beyond Great Uncle William's house, the valley narrowed into a green saddle glinting with white waterfalls, where the pass led up into Montalbino. The other way, past the bulge of mountain where the meadow was, the thread of road joined the more winding thread of river, and both plunged in among the roofs, towers, and turrets of High Norland City. Lights were coming on there too, but Charmaine could still see the soft shining of the famous golden roof on the royal mansion, with the flicker of the flag above it. And she thought she could even pick out her parents' house beyond it. None of it was very far away. Charmaine was quite surprised to see that Great Uncle William really lived only just outside the town. Behind the town, the valley opened out. It was lighter there, out of the shadow of the mountains, melting into twilight distance with orange pricks of lights in it. Charmaine could see the long, important shape of Castle Joy, where the Crown Prince lived, and another castle she did not know about. This one was tall and dark, with smoke drifting from one of its turrets. Behind it, the land faded into bluer distance, full of farms, villages, and industries that formed the heart of the country. Charmaine could actually see the sea, misty and faint beyond that. "We're not a very big country, are we?" she thought. But this thought was interrupted by a sharp buzzing from the bunch of flowers that she held. She held the bunch up to see what was making the noise. Up here in the meadow, the sun was still quite dazzlingly bright, bright enough for Charmaine to see that one of her blue trumpet-shaped, probably gentians, was shaking and vibrating as it buzzed. She must have picked one with a bee in it by mistake. Charmaine held the flowers downwards and shook them. Something purple and whirring fell out into the grass by her feet. It was not exactly bee-shaped, and instead of flying away as a bee would, it sat in the grass and buzzed. As it buzzed, it grew. Charmaine took a nervous sideways step from it, along the edge of the cliff. It was bigger than Waif already, and still growing. I don't like this, she thought. What is it? Before she could move or even think again, the creature shot up to twice the height of a person. It was dark purple and man-shaped, but it was not a man. It had small, see-through purple wings on its back that were blurred and whirring with motion, and its face was... Charmaine had to look away. Its face was the face of an insect, with groping bits and feeler bits, antennae, and bulging eyes that had at least 16 smaller eyes inside of them. Oh, heavens, Charmaine whispered. I think the thing's a Lubbock. I am the Lubbock, the creature announced. Its voice was a mixture of buzz and snarl. I am the Lubbock, and I own this land. Charmaine had heard of Lubbocks. People at school had whispered of Lubbocks, and none of it was pleasant. The only thing to do, they said, was to be very polite and hope to get away without being stung and then eaten. I'm very sorry, Charmaine said. I didn't realize I was trespassing in your land, or in your meadow. You are trespassing wherever you tread, the Lubbock snarled. All the land that you see is mine. What, all of High Norland? Charmaine said. Don't talk nonsense. I never talk nonsense, the creature said. All is mine, and you are mine. The wings whirring, it began to stalk on towards her on most unnaturally looking wiry blobs of feet. I shall come to claim my own very soon now, but I shall claim you first. It took a whirring stride towards Charmaine. Its arms came out, and so did a pronged sting on the lower part of its face. Charmaine screamed and dodged and fell off the edge, scattering flowers as she fell. Hail hydrate. Excuse me. So, it is. We're on page 60, and I am willing to read you another 30 pages, because I love you. So, we go to chapter 4, which introduces Rollo, Peter, and mysterious changes to Waif. Charmaine heard the Lubbock give a whirring shout of rage, though not nearly for the rushing of the wind of the fall. She saw the huge cliff streaking past her face. She went on screaming, Ilf, Elf, Elf! She bellowed, Oh, for goodness sake, Elf! I just did a flying spell. Why doesn't it work? But it was working. Charmaine realized it must be when the upward rush of rocks in front of her slowed to a crawl, then to a glide, and then to a dawdle. For a moment she hung in space, bobbing just above the gigantic spikes of rock in the crags below the cliff. Perhaps I'm dead now, she thought. Then she said, That's ridiculous, and managed by means of a lot of ungainly kicking and arm-waving to turn herself over. And there was Great Uncle William's house, still a long way below her in the gloaming, and about a quarter-mile off. It's all very well floating, Charmaine said, but how do I move? At this point, she remembered that the Lubbock had wings and was probably at that very moment whirring down from the heights towards her. After that, there was no need to ask how to move. Charmaine found herself kicking her legs mightily and positively surging towards Great Uncle William's house. She shot in over its roof and across the front garden, where the spell seemed to leave her. She just had time to jerk herself sideways so that she was above the path before she came down with a thump and sat on the neat, crazy paving shaking all over. Safe, she thought. Somehow, there seemed to be no doubt that inside of Great Uncle William's boundaries, it was safe. She could feel that it was. After a bit, she said, Oh, goodness, what a day. When I think that all I've ever asked for was a good book and a bit of peace to read it in. Oh, bother, Aunt Sempronia. The bushes beside her rustled. Charmaine flinched away and nearly screamed again when the hydrangeas bent aside to let a small blue man hop out onto the path. You in charge here now? This small blue person demanded in a small, hoarse voice. Even in the twilight, the little man was definitely blue, not purple, and he had no wings. His face was crumpled with bad-tempered wrinkles and almost filled with a mighty nose, but it was not an insect's face. Charmaine's panic vanished. What are you? She said. Kobold, of course, said the little man. High Norland is all kobold country. I do the garden here. What, at night? Charmaine said. Us kobolds mostly come out at night. Mostly, said the small blue man. What I said, are you in charge? Well, sort of. Thought so, the kobold said, satisfied. Saw the wizard get carried off by the tall ones. So you'll be wanting all these hydrangeas chopped down, then? Whatever for? Well, I like to chop things down, the kobold explained. It's the chief pleasure of gardening. Charmaine, who had never thought about gardening in her life, considered this. No, she said. Great Uncle William wouldn't have left them if he didn't like them. He's coming back before long, and I think he might be upset to find them all chopped down. Why don't you just do your usual night's work and see what he says when he's back? Oh, he'll say no, of course, the kobold said. He's a spoil sport, the wizard is. Usual fee, then? Well, what's your usual fee? Charmaine asked. The kobold said promptly. Well, I'll take a crock of gold and a dozen new eggs. Fortunately, Great Uncle William's voice spoke out of the air at the same time. I pay Rollo a pint of milk nightly, my dear, magically delivered. No need to concern yourself. The kobold spat disgustedly on the path. What did I say? Didn't I say he was a spoil sport and a fat lot of work I can do if you're going to sit in this path all night? Charmaine said with dignity. I was just resting. I'm going now. She got to her feet, feeling surprisingly heavy, not to speak of weak about the knees, and plodded up the path to the front door. It'll be locked, she thought. I shall look awfully silly if I can't get in. The door burst open before she reached it, letting out a surprising blaze of light, and with the light, Waif's small scampering shape, squeaking and wagging and wriggling with delight at seeing Charmaine again. Charmaine was so glad to be home and welcomed that she scooped Waif up and carried him indoors, while Waif writhed and wiggled and reached up to lick Charmaine's chin. Because, after all, puppers are wonderful and full of love. Indoors, the light seemed to follow you about, magically. Oh, good, Charmaine said aloud. Then I don't need to hunt for candles. But her inner thoughts were saying frantically, I left that window open. The Lubbock can get in. She dumped Waif on the kitchen floor and rushed left through the door. Light blazed in the corridor as she raced along to the end and slammed the window shut. Unfortunately, the light made it seem so dark in the meadow that no matter how hard she peered through the glass, she could not tell if the Lubbock was out there or not. She consoled herself with the thought that she had not been able to see the window once she was in the meadow. But she still found that she was shivering. After that, she could not seem to stop shivering. She shivered her way back to the kitchen, and shivered while she shared a pork pie with Waif, and shivered more because the pool of tea had spread out under the table, making the underside of Waif wet and brown. Whenever Waif came near her, parts of Charmaine became clammy with tea, too. In the end, Charmaine took off her blouse, which was flapping open because of the missing buttons anyway, and she wiped the tea up with it. This, of course, made her shiver more. She went and fetched herself the thick woolen sweater Mrs. Baker had packed for her, and huddled into it, but she still shivered. The threatening rain started. It beat on the window and pattered down the kitchen chimney, and Charmaine shivered even more. She supposed it was a shock, really, but she still felt cold. Or she supposed it was shock, really, but she still felt cold. Well, I can cosplay. Ooh. Dinner does not seem to be agreeing with me. This is my nice fleecy sweater. Oh, she cried out. How do I light a fire, Great Uncle William? I believe I left the spell in place, the kindly voice said out of the air. Simply throw into the grate one thing that will burn, and say aloud, Fire! Light! And you should have your fire. Charmaine looked around for one thing that would burn. There was a bag beside her on the table, but it still had another pork pie and an apple tart in it. And besides, it was a nice bag with flowers that Mrs. Baker had embroidered on it. There was a paper in Great Uncle William's study, of course, but that meant getting up and fetching it. There was the laundry in the bags by the sink, but Charmaine was fairly sure that Great Uncle William would not appreciate having his dirty clothes burned. On the other hand, there was her own blouse, dirty and tea-soaked and missing 2 buttons, in a heap on the floor by her feet. "It's ruined anyway," she said. She picked up the brown, soggy bundle and threw it into the fireplace. "Fire! Light!" she said. The grate thundered to life. For a minute or so, there was the most cheerfully blazing fire that anyone could have wished for. Charmaine sighed with pleasure. She was just moving her chair nearer to the warmth when the flames turned to hissing clouds of steam. Then, piling up and up among the steam, crowding up the chimney and blasting out into the room, came bubbles. Big bubbles, small bubbles, bubbles glimmering with rainbow colors. They came thronging out of the fireplace into the kitchen. They filled the air, landed on things, flew into Charmaine's face, where they burst with a soft sigh and kept coming. In seconds, the kitchen was a hot, steamy storm of froth, enough to make Charmaine gasp. "I forgot about the bar of soap," she said, panting in the sudden wet heat. Waif decided that the bubbles were personal enemies, and retreated under Charmaine's chair, yapping madly and snarling at the bubbles that burst. It was surprisingly noisy. "Oh, do shut up," Charmaine said. Sweat ran down her face. Her hair, which had come down over her shoulders, was dripping in the steam. She batted a cloud of bubbles away and said, "I think I'll take all my clothes off." And someone hammered on the back door. "Or perhaps not," Charmaine said. The person outside hammered on the door again. Charmaine sat where she was, hoping that it was not the Lubbock. But when the hammering came a third time, she got up reluctantly and picked her way among the storming bubbles to see who it was. It could be Rollos, she supposed, wanting to come in out of the rain. "Who are you?" she shouted through the door. "What do you want?" "I need to come in," the person outside shouted back. "It's pouring with rain." Whoever it was sounded young, and the voice did not rasp like Rollo's, nor buzz like the Lubbock's. And Charmaine could hear the rain thrashing down even through the hissing of steam and the continuous, gentle popping of the bubbles. But it could be a trick. "Let me in!" the person outside screamed. "The wizard's expecting me!" "That's not true!" Charmaine shouted back. "I wrote him a letter!" the person shouted. "My mother arranged for me to come. You've no right to keep me out!" The latch on the door waggled. Before Charmaine could do more than put both hands out to hold it shut, the door crashed open and a soaking wet boy surged inside. He was about as wet as a person could be. His hair, which was probably curly, hung round his face in dripping brown spikes. "Not curly, it's wavy." His sensible-looking jacket and trousers were black and shiny with wet, and so was the big knapsack on his back. His boots squelched as he moved. He began to steam the moment he was indoors. He stood staring at the crowding, floating bubbles, at Waif yapping and yapping under the chair, at Charmaine clutching her sweater and gazing at him between the red strands of her hair, at the stacks of dirty dishes and the table loaded with teapots. His eyes turned to the laundry bags, and these things were obviously all too much for him. His mouth came open, and he just stood there, staring around at all of these things all over again and steaming quietly. After a moment, Charmaine reached over and took hold of his chin, where the few harsh hairs grew, showing he was older than he looked. She pushed upwards, and his mouth shut with a... "Do you mind closing the door?" she said. The boy looked behind him at the rain pelting into the kitchen. "Oh, yes," he said. He heaved at the door until it shut. "What's going on? Are you the wizard's apprentice too?" "No," said Charmaine. "I'm only looking after the house while the wizard's not here. He was ill, you see, and the elves took him away to cure him." The boy looked very dismayed. "Didn't he tell you I was coming?" "He didn't really have time to tell me anything," Charmaine said. Her mind went to the pile of letters under Das Book. One of those hopeless requests for the wizard to teach people must have been from this boy, but Waif's yapping was making it difficult to think. "Oh, do shut up, Waif. What's your name, boy?" "Peter Regis," he said. "My mother's the Witch of Montalbino. She's a great friend of William Norland's, and she arranged with him for me to come here. Do be quiet, little dog. I meant to be here. He heaved himself up out of the wet knapsack and dumped it on the floor. Waif stopped barking in order to venture out from under the chair and sniff at the knapsack, in case it might be dangerous. Peter took the chair and hung his wet jacket on it. His shirt underneath was almost as wet. "And who are you?" he asked, peering at Charmaine among the bubbles. "Charmaine Baker," she told him, and explained. "We always call the wizard Great Uncle William, but he's Aunt Sempronia's relation, really. I live in High Norland. Where do you come from? Why have you come to the back door?" "I came down from Montalbino," Peter said, "and I got lost, if you must know, trying to take the shortcut from the pass. I did come here once before, when my mother was arranging for me to be the Wizard Norland's apprentice, but I don't seem to have remembered the way properly. How long have you been here?" "Only since this morning," Charmaine said, rather surprised to realize that she had not been here a whole day yet, but it had felt like weeks. "Oh," Peter looked at the teapots through the floating bubbles, as if he were calculating just how many cups of tea Charmaine had drunk. Looks as if you've been here for weeks." "It was like this when I came," Charmaine said coldly. "What, bubbles and all?" Charmaine thought, "I don't think I like this boy." "No," she said, "that was me. I'd forgotten I'd thrown my soap into the grate." "Ah," Peter said, "I thought it looked like a spell that's gone wrong. That's why I assumed you were an apprentice too. Well, we'll just have to wait for the soap to be used up, then. Have you any food? I'm starving." Charmaine's eyes went grudgingly to her bag on the table. She turned them away quickly. "No," she said, "not really." "Well, what are you going to feed your dog, then?" Peter said. Charmaine looked at Waif, who had gone under the chair again in order to bark at Peter's knapsack. "Nothing. He's just had half a pork pie," she said. "And he's not my dog. He's a stray that Great Uncle William took in. He's called Waif." Waif was still yapping. And Peter said, "Do be quiet, Waif," and reached among the storming bubbles and passed his wet jacket to where Waif crouched under the chair. Somehow he dragged Waif out and stood with Waif upside down in his arms. Waif uttered a squeak of protest, waved all four paws, and curled his frayed tail up between its back legs. Peter uncurled the tail. "You've damaged his dignity," Charmaine said. "Put him down." "He isn't a he," Peter said. "He's a she, and she hasn't got any dignity, have you, Waif?" Waif clearly disagreed and managed to scramble out of Peter's arms onto the table. Another teapot fell down and Charmaine's bag tipped over. To Charmaine's great dismay, the pork pie and the apple tart rolled out of it. "Oh, good," said Peter, and snatched up the pork pie just before Waif got to it. "Is this all the food you've got?" he said, biting deeply into the pie. "Yes," Charmaine said. "That was breakfast." She picked the fallen teapot up. The tea that had spilled out of it rapidly turned into brown bubbles, which whirled upward to make a brown streak among the other bubbles. "Now look at what you've done." "A bit more won't make any difference to this mess. Don't you ever tidy up? This is a really good pie. What's this other one?" Charmaine looked at Waif, who was sitting soulfully beside the apple tart. "Apple," she said. "And if you eat it, you have to give some to Waif too." "Is that a rule?" Peter said, swallowing the last of the pork pie. Heartlessly and cruelly, knowing that Waif was starving. "Yes," said Charmaine. "Waif made it, and she, is very firm about it." "Well, she's magical then," Peter suggested, picking up the apple tart. Waif at once made small, soulful noises and trotted about among the teapots. "I don't know," Charmaine began. Then she thought of the way the Waif seemed to be able to go anywhere in the house, and how the front door had burst open for her earlier on. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure she is. Very magical." Slowly and grudgingly, Peter broke a lump off of the apple tart. Waif's frayed tail wagged, and Waif's eyes followed his every movement. She seemed to know exactly what Peter was doing, no matter how many bubbles got in the way. "See what you mean," Peter said, and he passed the lump to Waif. Waifly gently took it in her jaws, jumped from the table onto the chair and then to the floor, and went pattering away to eat it somewhere behind the laundry bags. Excuse me, I must take this elsewhere. How about a hot drink? Peter said. A hot drink was something Charmaine had been yearning for ever since she fell off the mountainside. She shivered and hugged her sweater around herself. What a good idea, she said. Do make one if you can find out how. Peter waved the bubbles aside to look at the teapots on the table. Well, someone must have made all of these pots of tea. Great Uncle William must have made them, Charmaine said. It wasn't me. But it shows it can be done, Peter said. Stop standing there looking feeble and find a saucepan or something. You can find one, Charmaine said. Peter shot her a scornful look and strode across the room, waving bubbles aside as he went until he reached the crowded sink. There he naturally made the discoveries that Charmaine had made earlier. There are no taps, he said incredulously. And all these saucepans are dirty. Where did he get the water from? Well, there's a pump out in the yard, Charmaine said unkindly. Peter looked among the bubbles at the window, where rain was still streaming across the panes. Well, isn't there a bathroom, he said? And before Charmaine could explain how you got to it, he waved and stumbled his way across the kitchen to the other door and arrived in the living room. Bubbles stormed in there around him as he dove angrily back into the kitchen. Is this a joke? He said incredulously. He can't have only these 2 rooms. Charmaine sighed, huddled her sweater further around herself, and went to show him. You open the door again and turn left, she explained, and then had to grab Peter as he turned right. No, that way goes somewhere very strange. This is left. Can't you tell? No, Peter said. I never can. I usually have to tie a piece of string around my thumb. Charmaine rolled her eyes towards the ceiling and pushed him left. They both arrived in the corridor, which was loud with the rain pelting across the window at the end. Light slowly flooded the place as Peter stood looking round. Now you can turn right, Charmaine said, pushing him that way. The bathroom's this door here. That row of doors leads to the bedrooms. Ah, said Peter admiringly. He's been bending space. That's something I can't wait to learn how to do. Thanks, he added, and plunged into the bathroom. His voice floated back to Charmaine as she tiptoed towards the study. Oh, good. Taps. Water. Charmaine whisked herself into Great Uncle William's study and closed the door while the funny twisted lamp on the desk lit up and grew brighter. By the time she had reached the desk, it was almost bright as daylight in there. Charmaine shoved aside Das Book and picked up the bundle of letters underneath. She had to check if Peter was telling the truth. If Peter was telling the truth, one of the letters asking to be Great Uncle William's apprentice had to be from him. Because she had only skimmed through them, she had no memory of seeing one, and if there wasn't one, then she was dealing with an imposter, possibly a Lubbock. She had to know. Suspicion of being suspicious. Here it was, halfway down the pile. She put her glasses on and read. Esteemed Wizard Norland, with regard to my becoming your apprentice, will it be convenient for me to arrive with you in a week's time instead of in the autumn as arranged? My mother has to journey into Ingray and prefers to have me settled down before she leaves. Unless I hear from you to the contrary, I shall present myself at your house on the 13th of this month. Hoping it is convenient, yours faithfully, Peter Regis. So that seems to be all right, Charmaine thought, half relieved and half annoyed. When she had skimmed the letters earlier, her eye must have caught the word apprentice near the top and the word hoping near the bottom, and those words were all in letters. So she'd assumed that it was just another begging letter, and it looked as if Great Uncle William had done the same. Or perhaps he'd been too ill to reply. Whatever had happened, she seemed to be stuck with Peter. Bother. Well, at least he's not too sinister, she thought. Here she was interrupted by dismayed yelling from Peter in the distance. Charmaine hastily stuffed the letters back under the Das Book, snatched off her glasses, and dove out into the corridor. Steam was blasting out of the bathroom, mixing with the bubbles that had strayed in there. It almost concealed something vast and white that was looming towards Charmaine. What have you done? She began. This was all she had time to say, before the vast white something put out a gigantic pink tongue and licked her face. It also gave a huge trumpeting sound. Charmaine reeled backwards. It was like being licked by a wet bath towel and whined at by an elephant. She leaned against the wall and stared up into the creature's enormous, pleading eyes. I know those eyes, Charmaine said. What has he done to you, Waif? Peter surged out of the bathroom, gasping. I don't know what went wrong, he gasped. The water didn't come out hot enough to make tea, so I thought I'd make it hotter with the spell of enlargement. I'll do it backward at once, Charmaine said. Waif's the size of an elephant. Peter shot the huge Waif a distracted look. Well, she's only the size of a cart horse, but the pipes in there are red hot. What do you think I should do? Oh, honestly, Charmaine said. She pushed the enormous Waif gently aside and went to the bathroom. As far as she could see through the steam, boiling water was gushing out of all 4 taps and flushing into the toilet, and the pipes along the walls were indeed glowing red. Great Uncle William, she shouted, how do I make the bathroom water run cold? How do I make the bathroom water run cold? Great Uncle William's kindly voice, among the hissing and gushing, spoke. You'll find further instructions somewhere in the suitcase, my dear. That's no good, Charmaine said. She knew there was no time to go searching around through suitcases. Something was going to explode soon. Go cold, she shouted into the steam. Freeze, all you pipes, go cold at once, she screamed, waving both arms. I order you to go cold! It worked, to her astonishment. The steam died away to mere puffs and then vanished altogether. The toilet stopped flushing. 3 of the taps gurgled and stopped running. Frost almost immediately formed on the tap that was running, the cold tap over the wash basin, and an icicle grew from the end over it. Another icicle appeared on the pipes that ran across the wall and slid hissing down into the bath. That's better, Charmaine said, and turned round to look at Waif. Waif looked sadly back. She was as big as ever. Waif, Charmaine said, go small. Now. I order you. Waif sadly wagged the tip of her monstrous tail and stayed the same size. Well, she's magic, Peter said. She can probably turn herself back if she wants to. Oh, shut up, Charmaine snapped at him. What did you think you were doing? You were trying to do anyway. No one can drink scalding water. Peter glowered at her from under the twisted dripping ends of his hair. I wanted a cup of tea, he said. You make tea with boiling water. Charmaine had never made tea in her life. She shrugged. Do you really? She raised her face to the ceiling. Great Uncle William, how do we get a hot drink in this place? The kindly voice spoke again. In the kitchen, you tap the table and say, tea, my dear. In the living room, tap the trolley in the corner and say, afternoon tea. In your bedroom... Neither Peter nor Charmaine waited to hear about the bedroom. They dove forwards and slammed the bathroom door and opened it again, Charmaine giving Peter a stern push to the left, and jammed themselves through it into the kitchen, turned round and shut the door, opened it again, and finally arrived in the living room, where they looked eagerly around for the trolley. Peter spotted it over in the corner and reached it ahead of Charmaine. He shouted, hammering mightily onto its empty, glass-covered surface, Afternoon tea! Afternoon tea! Afternoon tea! Afternoon! By the time Charmaine got to him and seized his flailing arm, the trolley was crowded with pots of tea, milk jugs, sugar bowls, cups, scones, dishes of creams, dishes of jam, plates of hot buttered toast, piles of muffins, and chocolate cake. A drawer slid out of the end of it, full of knives, spoons, and forks. Charmaine and Peter, with one accord, dragged the trolley over to the musty sofa and settled down to eat and to drink. After a minute, Waif put her huge head through the door, sniffing. Seeing the trolley, she shoved a bit and arrived in the living room, where she crawled wistfully out and mountainously over to the sofa and put her enormous hairy chin on the back of it behind Charmaine. Peter gave her a distracted look and passed her several muffins, which she ate in one mouthful with most excruciating politeness. A good half-hour later, Peter lay back and stretched. Oh, that was great, he said. At least we won't starve. Wizard Norland, he added experimentally. How do we get lunch in this house? There was no reply. He only answers me, Charmaine said, a trifle smugly. And I'm not going to ask now. I had to deal with that Lubbock before you came, and I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed. What are Lubbocks? Peter asked. I think one of them killed my father. Charmaine did not feel up to answering him. She got up and went to the door. Wait, Peter said. How do we get rid of the stuff on the trolley? No idea, said Charmaine, and she opened the door. Wait, Peter said, hurrying after her. Show me my bedroom first. I suppose I'll have to, Charmaine thought. He can't tell left from right, she sighed. Unwillingly, she shoved Peter in the kitchen, among the bubbles that were still storming into the kitchen, thicker than ever, so that he could collect his knapsack, then steered him left, back through the door to where the bedrooms were. Take the third one along, she said. That one's mine, and the first one's Great Uncle William's. But there's miles of them. If you want a different one, good night, she added, and went into the bathroom. Everything in there was frozen. Oh. Well, Charmaine said. By the time she got to her bedroom and into her somewhat tea-stained nightdress, Peter was out in the corridor shouting, The toilet's frozen over! Bad luck, Charmaine thought. She got into bed and was asleep almost at once. About an hour later, she dreamt that she was being sat on by a woolly mammoth. Get off, knife, she said. You're too big. After this, she dreamt that the mammoth slowly got off of her, grumbling under its breath, before she went off into other, deeper dreams. So, hopefully, this time, the computer will cooperate. But anyway, you have more important things than to listen to me. So, remember that if people can hate without without knowing a thing about you, then I can love you for exactly the same reason. So get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. I love you very much, dear. Sleep well.